All right. I lied. Second time today. We're writers. We lie and then try to get people to pay us for it. I said it was going to be a 10-minute break, but I'm going to make it a 9-minute break because I want time to introduce Kevin without chewing into his time. I'll let Kevin do any detailed introduction, but I just want to point out that Kevin is, in his way, and I think he knows this already, as responsible as anyone for my career because he introduced me to Dean Wesley Smith and Chris Catherine Rush, and their instruction changed how I wrote, changed how I approached this as a field, and got me interested in Writers of the Future, which kept me moving on to my next step. So when Kevin said he wanted to talk, I'm like, definitely, because you gave me some great advice. So I'm sure you have more great advice to share. And in particular, I'm reading his Coffee Break Novelist book now, which is a great book on productivity. So I can get better at that myself. So I will turn it over to Kevin. Kevin, did you need screen share?
Nope, I do not. I am not a PowerPoint kind of person. So hi, folks. All right. Hi, folks. My name's Kevin McLaughlin. Can you see me or?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Good. I'm still seeing Martin right now, but my name is Kevin McLaughlin. I write science fiction and fantasy. I've got roughly 80 books out right now. And I wrote this book called Coffee Break Novelist because it was the book I wish I'd had back when I was working 60 hours a week as a nurse with 3 small children at home, trying desperately to figure out where I was supposed to come up with time to write. And I figured it out more or less, but it was a real challenge more times than not. And so I wrote that book really for other people who were in the same state I was or in a similar state where they were just trying to figure out how on earth to get in the 15 minutes a day or the half an hour a day when our lives are so busy and we're so running around all the time. Well, we're going to talk. The book is chock full of all kinds of tips and tricks and techniques, and it's a lot of workable stuff. The one that's up there right now is actually a second edition where I went through it a second time and I showed process stuff for each of the different sets of tips as well as the original chapters. So we're going to talk about some of that stuff today, but one of the things I've been working on more in more recent years is to look at the foundational principles of something instead of looking at just here's an arsenal of tools for your toolbox. I want to take a step back today and look at some of the foundational principles of how to find that time and use it effectively. So what I did was I came up with 3 key elements. I'm good at coming up with like 3, 4, or 5 or something. The pillars of publishing, the key elements of writing a time crunch are finding time, using that time effectively, and creating and managing overall goals. So all of those are crucial. A lot of the time people focus on finding time. We all know, and it's one of the first chapters in the book, is to go and set yourself up a schedule and write down what you did with every 15-minute block of time during your day, every single day for about a week or so. And the objective then is to find out where you're doing things that don't actually match your stated goals. So if your stated goals are, I want to get healthier, spend more time with my family, write a book, and do great at work, and you find out that you're spending 2 hours a day doing things that are, 2, 3 hours a day doing things that are none of those, well, then maybe it's time to reprioritize some of that time. And that's good advice. That's a great technique. It's a great way of doing things, but it's often not enough. We need to, it can be hard to sometimes just sit down and write. And so we need to look a lot more intensely at how to make those little spots of writing more effective. What I did back when I was doing that 60 hours a week thing was I would bring a little old Chromebook with me to work, and every day I'd have my lunch break and I'd sit down, I'd wolf down some food in 5 or 10 minutes, and then I'd spend the rest of my lunch break with headphones on, just typing. And that was sometimes the only writing time I got in a week. Was 5 days a week. I'd get in 20, maybe 30 minutes of writing time. And sometimes that was what I had. And so that's what I used. But how many people, like, I wish I could do a show of hands. Ordinarily I would. But a bunch of people, if I could do a show of hands, would probably say that sometimes when they sit down to write, it takes them 15, 20 minutes to really get into the groove, to get going. And when all you've got is 15 or 30 or maybe 45 minutes, if you're losing half or a third of that to just kind of getting into the groove, then that's incredibly unproductive. So one of the most critical things to work on if you have limited amounts of time, if somebody says that it takes longer than 15 minutes, yeah, it can for a lot of people. So one of the things we want to work on, if we want to improve our efficiency here, is to figure out ways of dropping into the zone more rapidly, dropping into a flow state, essentially, more rapidly. So Pomodoro timers are a help. We can get into the habit by building the habit of setting off our little timer on our screen or whatever, and then sitting down and immediately beginning to type. Whether or not what we're typing actually makes a ton of sense, you are building the habit, and your brain will eventually get the idea, oh, I turn on the timer, it's time to go. It's a little bit like the blowing the whistle and making people salivate sort of thing. It really does work. Operant conditioning is a thing, and you're trying to operant condition yourself at that point. One of the other more effective tools is to think about your story in between sessions. And I know this sounds really obvious, but a lot of people don't. And so what I'll be doing a lot of the time while I'm, doing something else, is I'll be thinking about what happens next in my storyline. If I'm stuck on something, let's say I ended at a bad place and I don't know what's happening next, just happened to me this week. Going to bed and thinking about it, and then getting up the next day and thinking about it again. And all of a sudden, by the time I get around to being back at the keyboard, I've got the next scene in mind and I can begin writing it immediately. And more importantly than that, I'm actually excited about it because I've been daydreaming about it. I want to get this thing down now that I've seen the movie of the scene in my head. I want to, put it on the page. And that excitement is really powerful. I can't stress that enough. What I found was that if I was treating spinning my break, doing more work, like it was a chore, then I got almost nothing done. But as soon as I was able to treat those writing sessions as my reward, I got through my morning of work. Morning was rough. Hey, as a nurse, it frequently is. Morning was rough, but now I can sit down, I can get a little bit of food into me, and I can spend the next 20 minutes just working on this scene that I've been thinking about for the last 6 hours, and it's ready to come out now. So look at ways to do the work while you're not at the keyboard. And back of your head can always be working on the next story. Focusing on the work is also important. You need to set hard limits on the other people around you. I put on noise canceling headphones and like the big old ones in the break room. And I would sit there at my table with the headphones on, and I would very rarely get interrupted because people saw I was clearly doing something that was important to me. On the few occasions where I did get interrupted, I would politely say, I'm really sorry, I've got to get this done right now. And I would get right back into work. That's super important. No matter where it is that you're doing these blocks, you've got to find ways to set up that this is your writing time and this is not your time to be bugged by other people or whatever. With my kids, I actually had a set of red headphones for a while. And when they were little, when the red headphones meant that I was working. And if they needed me, they could come up and they could just say that they needed me. but they would understand that it might be, a couple minutes before I was able to come right away. So they would go grab mom if if I had the red headphones on. And of course I would swap in for her when I wasn't ready. So ways of making sure that these times that you've created, these slots you've created, are not interrupted is incredibly important. And the last thing I'm going to mention for this little list of tools here is an app called Flow State. And you're going to hate it. I can absolutely guarantee you're going to hate it. I can also guarantee you that if you practice with it for a month, you will be able to double your hourly output of words if you're writing less than 1,500 words an hour right now. Less than 1,200, let's say. Yeah, you'll be able to double it. Flow State is an app for Mac and iOS. There's also a website called The Most Dangerous Writing App. Just search for that on Google and you'll find it, which does the same thing. And what both of these apps do is they allow you to set a timer. The short timers are about 5 minutes, and the longest on Flow State is 3 hours, which I've never done. When you turn on the app and you press the first letter for what you're writing, your timer begins, and if you stop pressing keys, it deletes everything that you've written that session. You have 6 seconds. So if I press a key, if I type in for a little bit and then I remove my hands from the keyboard, I will have 6 seconds to press another key before it deletes everything that I've written in that session. Now, I know this probably sounds terrifying for a lot of people. It's not. I've lost words once with this program, and I've used it a lot. I know. I know. That's always the response I get from writers. It's not your primary writing tool. It's a training tool. Okay, just think about it that way. It's not the tool you're going to use to write with every single day. I use Ulysses most of the time. It's like a nicer version of Scrivener. But it's a good Flow State or The Most Dangerous Writing App. These are good training tools to begin improving your speed. And speed is part of efficiency. The more words we can get out in that 15 minutes, the better. And so there's a huge qualitative result, difference between somebody who can do 2,000 words an hour and somebody who can do 1,000. Even if you're doing 15-minute sprints, that's a big deal. So what I've found by teaching people with this app is that most of the time, the people who are writing and only doing about 500 words an hour or so, like 125 words in a 15-minute sprint, that means that they're basically writing, they're barely writing. They're spending most of that time thinking about what they're going to write instead of actually sitting down and just pressing the keys. And so the objective is to train your mind to drop into that state of flow, into that deep focus level where you're 100% in the groove and you're just, the story's pouring out of you. That's the mindset we want to reach. We want to be able to do that on demand. Flow State trains us to do that. Now, the trick with these apps is that if you really do get stuck, you can just press spacebar, backspace, spacebar, backspace over and over again until you figure, oh yeah, I know I got to write, and then you start writing again. What this does though is it keeps your fingers on the keys. You don't get to alt tab out to another thing. You don't get to stare at the clock on the wall. You don't get to look out the window. You actually have to stay focused on the work. And it might be for a 15-minute sprint. That's actually a good number to go with for the early ones. I've gone as high as 2 hours. It's actually really tough. That requires some real mental stamina to just be writing nonstop, no breaks for 2 hours straight. It's a stamina push. You can work your way up to that, but I would recommend working your way up to that. For starters though, 10, 15 minutes is great. That's a super block of time for training this sort of technique. And again, what we're doing here is we're increasing our words per hour, which is increasing our productivity. I went up from about 1,200 words per hour when I started writing about 15 years ago. When I started writing more seriously about 15 years ago, I was doing about 1,200 words an hour. I'm a little over 3,000 words an hour average now typed. And And I'm not as fast as I can go. I know that I can type faster than that. So I know that my upper limit is probably closer to 4,500 words per hour typed. My storytelling speed, the speed of which the story is created in my head and then transmitted to my fingers, that's not faster than that yet, because I'm about the same speed dictating as I am typing. But by training our minds, we can learn to write our stories faster, and we can learn to drop into that storytelling mode more quickly, so we can take better advantage of whatever time slots we've got. I touched on the next thing a little bit, which was mental endurance. And that's that, like there's basically two factors involved in productivity, which is how many words you can produce per hour and how many hours per week you can sit behind the keyboard and produce new words. As writers who are, if we're writers who are trying to find time, trying to find the moments, the coffee breaks, then we're less focused on endurance usually, and we're more focused on either trying to find the individual spots or trying to improve how many words we can get in that 15-minute sprint. But mental endurance can still play a factor, and if you're finding that it can make a difference for you, I would recommend using something like flow state for longer and longer periods of time to gradually train up to the point where you can reliably sit down and put out 2,400 words in an hour sitting behind the keyboard without really stopping, without taking breaks. Don't bring yourself out. Don't break yourself. This is why it's important to train up to these sorts of things. If we're pushing too hard too quickly, you can actually injure your hands. You can injure your arms. You can injure your head, burn out. And so build up to stronger levels of productivity in the same way that you would build up as a runner. Practice. All right. And we wanted to talk about goals a little bit here too. Everybody talks about SMART goals, and there's even some in the book about SMART goals. And I'm assuming probably most people here knows what SMART stands for. It's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timed or timely. So you want a specific goal. You want a goal that says, I want to write a book a month. Oh, okay. Measurable. Well, that one was specific and it's measurable because I've got a timeline. I know that I need to have the book done at the end of the month if I started at the beginning of the month. So now I have a measurable goal. Attainable, for me, that's very attainable. For somebody else, that might be impossible. So it's important to keep the goals that you're going to use locked to your own skill level, and to increase them over time, sure, but don't create goals that are so outlandishly difficult that there's no way you can possibly reach them. Try and gauge something that will push your limits a little bit, but that is attainable. If I decided I'm gonna write 50 books next year, say, like Dean did. Only he did 70. Well, he published 70 new works. A lot of them were short stories. Okay. But it was his 70th birthday present for himself, was he went and published 70 things. Now, is that an attainable goal for a lot of us in this room? Maybe, maybe not. But for him, it was. So set your goals for you. Relevant. The goals should be relevant to whatever your primary focuses are, which means it's a good idea to look at overall life balance for this kind of thing. What is actually important in your life? One of my favorite stories about that was a story from a therapist about a client. And the client was there because they were telling the therapist that they were having real problems with their life, with balance and making things work. And what they really wanted was to spend more time with their family and get healthier and save money. And all they could talk about during the sessions, though, all this guy could talk about was Candy Crush and how much time and how much money he was spending on Candy Crush. And eventually, what she told him was that his goal wasn't actually to do the things that he said he wanted to do. His real goals were to play a lot of Candy Crush and beat Candy Crush, because that was what he was showing. That's what he was doing. So obviously that wasn't really what he said he wanted to do or what he thought he wanted to do, but it was what his actions were creating, the reality that his actions were creating. It's important that whatever goals we set for ourselves are relevant to our primary goals, to the big issue things, the things that we want to do with our lives. If we're keeping our smaller goals in line with our big ones, Facebook is my goal. Yes. Oh, Andy he said short stories don't count. I don't know how he did it. Dean always impresses me. Yes, set up a goal for yourself which is in line with the things that you value most in life. Make it relevant to you. That's what self-efficacy is all about. That's what self-actualization rather is all about. Is about, making sure that your actions and the short-term goals you set are aligned properly with who you want to be and where you want to be. Timed, a month, a week, whatever. You want to be able to analyze and assess whether or not it worked. Did you succeed? And also ideally figure out where you went wrong so you can plan better next time if it didn't work, or where you went too light if it was too easy, so you can increase the difficulty of your goals in the future. Now, there's a bunch of people going around on the internet right now, because obviously we can't have an acronym without adding more letters to it. So a lot of people are now talking about smarter goals, because you've got to always have your next generation of internet guru who's passing around the newest hottest thing, whatever it is. But I actually kind of like this one, and there's a bunch of different definitions for what that E and that R should be. I found two that I really like, and that's exciting and risky. So exciting is important because if a goal doesn't excite us, we're not going to do it. It's a little bit like Rachel Aaron's 2K to 10K book. In there, she mentions that the parts of the book that she's bored writing, the reader will almost always be bored reading. I think it was her anyway. I'm pretty sure that was that book. But it's a good thing to keep in mind. If a goal doesn't excite us, if we set a goal for ourselves and it's not exciting, it's not really getting us revved up, we're probably not going to do the parts of it that are necessary in order to reach the final goal. It's vital that we have buy-in from ourselves. Essentially, it's vital that we work on making our goals exciting. Now, some people do that by rewarding themselves. If I finish this book in a month, then I will go and buy myself $100 in new books to read, or whatever. You can create that excitement by doing, by using a carrot. You can create the excitement by using a stick. Chris Fox did that at one point. I'm going to write a book in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever it was, and he did. But by publicly announcing it, if he didn't, he was going to look silly, he figured. So he created excitement for himself using the stick approach that time. And it's possible to just have inherent excitement too. Like, I want to do this really cool thing. Okay, I'll come clean. I actually want to write the world record number of novels in a year. I'm not at the point where I can do that yet. I'm working my way up there, but that's going to be one of my goals that I approach at some point along the line. And I'm excited about it because I think that that's really, really cool. And so that's an example of something that I'm personally excited about. It has no outside value. Well, it'll help my career a little bit too, probably. But the main thing is that it'll be fun. And when I do challenges, one of the things I love about Dean Wesley Smith is that when he does challenges, he literally just does it for fun. And he does it so that even if he fails forward, and he's gotten improvement out of the deal. He's gone up a little bit, even if he missed the final mark, he's still gotten cool stuff done. So falling forward is important. Risky. We grow best by taking chances and by pushing ourselves. Now, attainable is also in there earlier, but I think that a lot of the time people read attainable and they think, okay, I've got to keep it easy. And that's not always a good way to go. If the world is at stake and the aliens are going to invade and blow up the planet if you don't succeed, using the safest and least likely to fail method is probably the best bet. But if you're looking toward personal growth, then building goals which push your limits a little bit are actually the most effective ways of getting there. We grow under stress. We improve by pushing our limits. And so I think it's really important that we look at that piece of things while we're creating goals for ourselves. And as an addendum to this whole thing here, I want to add, don't compare. It really bothered me actually earlier this week when I saw a lot of science fiction authors, science fiction and fantasy authors, kind of publicly or beating on an author for being a little bit extra productive over the last couple of years, or for like getting $20 million on a Kickstarter. Everybody knows what I'm talking about, I think. And I think that sort of comparisonitis is really toxic and poisonous. I feel like it's really worth celebrating other people's accomplishments when they have them. But at the same time, I think that a lot of the time people feel like somebody else doing something makes them smaller. And I really feel like that's one of the most harmful points of view, especially if you're at the beginning and you're trying to move upward. Which is really like, I know, I don't know what skill level people are at in this audience, but the Coffee Break Novelist concept is aimed at the part-timer who wants to go full-time, really. And for that person, the looking at somebody else and feeling jealous about their accomplishment is so harmful. It's so damaging, because not only are you cutting yourself off from learning from them, but you're kind of like steeping yourself in those negative emotions. And I just cannot recommend enough to avoid that sort of comparisonitis. Somebody else is where they're at because they've been doing what they've been doing for however many years it took them to get there. And we are where we're at because of what we've been doing. And if I hadn't started writing again in 2007, I wouldn't have caught the early wave of stuff, but maybe I started in 2017 instead. Would I be where I am right now? Exactly, no. So small changes in life can make huge differences in where we end up. It's important to, I guess that bothered me a little bit, but it's important to remember to keep that to keep that in its place, and to look at our own pages, celebrate other people's accomplishments, look to the things that we can learn from the people who did cool stuff. But them doing cool stuff doesn't take away from us. All right. At this point, I want to open things up for questions a little bit and see if this, I don't know exactly where people are at, but I have a variety of other techniques and stuff here that I can go over for people who have specific problems or are looking at some specific way that they want to improve their productivity overall. So type away. I'm checking back to see if I missed any questions here. One thing to keep in mind is there's another writer watching what you're doing so they too can succeed. That's almost always the case. And they're also watching what the newer writers are watching what you guys are doing too, and are going to follow your lead because they see you as being further along the path than they are, and you are. So the brand new baby writers are going to be looking at you. And, like it just, and someday, like everyone in this channel is probably going to be doing their own seminars on stuff to help pass it on down. Do the programs like Scrivener help with making your writing more efficient? They can. If your software is getting in the way of your work, dump it. I've used virtually every writing software available today, and that is my firm feeling: is use whatever is working best for you, for for your flow, your flow state, for your methodology, your workflow. I happen to use Ulysses, and then from there I export it into Vellum, and then I upload it to the internet. I use Word back and forth for edits with editors. But if that didn't work for me, I would switch to something else in a heartbeat. If something else better comes along, I will switch to that right away. Whatever you use the best tool for you for the job. Oh yeah, and this is related to the last question as well. What about getting too caught and distracted up in research? Good ways of keeping focus. So it's easy to end up in, I have to check out all 20 different writing applications before I can begin my novel. No, just say, okay, I'm going to write a novel in Scrivener. I'm going to give it an honest shot. I'm going to write a novel in Scrivener, and if I don't like it, I'll switch to something else for next book. Just do the work while you're testing the thing. And likewise, do the work while you're researching the next thing. So what I usually recommend for research is the thing that the writer does in their free reading time when they're not writing and they want to research the next book that they're going to do. I try to avoid having to research stuff for the book that I'm currently writing. I find that it really drags me away from the story. In a worst case scenario, if I do need to look up something, which happens especially in science fiction, I'll put in a little note to myself, one of those big, like all block caps, fill this in, and then I'll look it up later because I'm trying to write during my writing session. I'm not trying to go look stuff up. But research can be a problem. What I will usually push myself to do is do the research for the books I want to write next while I'm writing the books that I am now. And whether that research is rewatching all of Battlestar Galactica because I want to get that vibe, that was something I did, or like researching orbital dynamics because I need to know it, which was hard. Do that first before you start working on the series, and you'll save yourself a lot of headaches. What do I think of NaNoWriMo as a productivity tool? I have a special place in my heart for NaNoWriMo because the way I got started back into writing, I dropped out in the 90s when I realized basically it was going to take like lottery winner level luck for me to actually make a career as a writer. So I was like, no, there's other things I can do. And I got back in 2007 because a friend said, hey, there's this NaNoWriMo thing. You should check it out. And I did, and I had a blast with it. And then I did it again in 2008, and I had a blast with it. And right about then, I found Joe Conrath and then Dean Wesley Smith, and the rest is history. But if I hadn't had somebody tell me about NaNoWriMo back then, I wouldn't have found the indie movement right when it was starting off, and I wouldn't have been part of this whole ball of wax right from the beginning. It was a lot of fun. So I'm really glad I did, and I have a soft spot in my heart for NaNoWriMo. And the reality is that most full-time indies today will do a NaNoWriMo or more every month of the year. It's pretty typical for me to do 100,000 or so words a month. Now that's for full-timers. But NaNoWriMo was a great way to push you into that state, into that habit for just a little while, without having to worry about it all year long. For people who aren't at that point where they're writing a NaNoWriMo a month every month yet, it is a great way to just get into the groove of writing every single day. Okay, I got to get my 1,800 words in, or whatever it is, 1,700 words. I got to get my words in today. I got to get my words in, and I really like it. I was a municipal liaison for Vermont for 3 years in a row. Brackets and colored text, yeah, or ampersands, because I never ever use them for anything else, so I can always just do a search and find my ampersands. Use something that you're not going to use any other way, and that way you're going to be able to always find it. How do you improve productivity in other parts of the business beyond words on the page? And if someone else is involved, editor, illustrator, etc., how do you support their productivity? Okay, wow, those are good questions. How do you support productivity in other parts of the business beyond words on the page? Are we talking, I don't know if we're talking advertising here or what have you, but there's almost always somebody else involved, editors and illustrators and what have you. I find that the easiest way to support their productivity is to be timely. If they're asking me for an artist's brief, don't wait 3 days to give it to them, because then I'm cutting into their productive time. I'm damaging their career because they're not working on the thing that I want to have them make. They're sitting there waiting for me, potentially. Hopefully not, but maybe. Editors, likewise, if you be timely. If you say, hey, I'm going to have a book for you on April 3rd, have the book ready by April 3rd. It's important to be professional here and to make sure that you're respecting their time as well as your own. Does that answer that question? Okay. Could you possibly walk us through your outlining, drafting, and revision process? How complete are your first drafts? How long do you generally spend on revisions? I'm actually a very strong proponent of a modified version of Dean Wesley Smith's method, which is I don't outline, I don't draft, and I don't revise. I write the book. And then it gets a typo correction editing pass, and then it gets published. And that's it. Don't worry about outlining the thing beforehand. I just write the words. I don't do multiple drafts. I just write a book and I send it to an editor, and I'm 80 books in, guys. Remember what I said about the comparisonitis stuff? I was not at this point 40 books ago. So this is something that I practiced really, really hard to be able to do. I don't know, this is one of the places where Dean and I diverge a little bit. I don't know if every writer out there could just do this out of the box without any problems whatsoever. I'm sure that there are many writers who could, but I'm equally sure that there are many writers who will struggle trying to copycat what I do. It is not necessary to follow that method in order to reach success. I know plenty of people who do revisions. I know plenty of people who do outlines. These are all viable paths. So my way is my way because I hate revising, guys. I hate it. I like writing. I don't like rereading my own books. If I can not reread my books, I don't usually reread other people's books. Why would I want to reread mine? So I really work very, very hard on not having to do any revision. And sometimes I have to anyway, because the editor says, you need to fix this. But I keep it to a minimum. And I only do revision of anything to editorial direction. Oh my goodness. Yay for NaNoWriMo. Agree with doing research first. When it comes to editing, do you recommend a certain amount of time spent every day? Honestly, I usually recommend hiring somebody else to do my editing for me. For many, many years, about 7 years ago, I realized that every time I hired an editor, I was getting dinged on my reviews for bad editing. And every time I was the sole editor for the work, I realized that I was not getting any negative reviews about bad editing. And this led to me doing all of my own editing for like the following 20 books or so after that, and being the sole editor for more than half of my indie published books. I don't recommend that for everybody, but if you're going to do that, what I would recommend doing would be to take it a chapter at a time and finish a chapter at a time. And for me, a chapter cleanup at this point usually takes me like 10 to 15 minutes for a chapter. That's for 1,500 words. So it's not unusual for me to charge through a full book of basic copy edits in 4 days. That's pretty typical for a workload. But again, that's for a full-time author. So, if we're looking at the coffee break end of things, it might take much longer if you're doing your own edits. I usually do recommend folks hire that out, because it's not just that it's that the other person may have more skill, which they often will. I used to be a professional editor in a previous career, which is why I'm decent at it, but not everybody has that background. But there's also the lost time factor. So in those 4 days, if I could have written 15, 20,000 words, that lost 15,000 words is worth more than the cost to have somebody else edit the book. So I was literally shooting myself in the foot by doing it myself instead of just hiring someone. It's something I had to get over. Everybody's got their own myths. Do you tend to write and complete stories from scratch, or do you have a personal slush pile for older pieces to complete? Both. I have several series that I'm trying to wrap up right now because I left them dangling. And I'm trying to wrap that up because my readers deserve better than that. So I'm busy I wrapped one up last fall, and I'm wrapping up another one this spring. I'm wrapping up a couple of older ones that have just slowly been getting they've been getting a book a year for a while, and it's time to just finish it, kind of thing. But mostly I try to stick to a single plot line for at least 3 to 6 books, because 3 books is where I can start making at least break even on ads reliably, and frequently start making a profit on ads. And 6 books is where I can be extremely sure I will make a profit on ads, and will sometimes make as much as double my money at 6 books. The 6 books is usually where I really start finding the sweet spot when it comes to pouring money into advertising. And I've always got more story ideas than I could ever possibly finish. Never done outlines ever. No, yeah, I don't think outlines are necessary. I think they can be a huge help. And here's the thing: is if you're used to writing with an outline, it can be really challenging to shift away from one. But it can also remember what I said about the risk thing. We grow by putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations. So it's always worth trying something new. If it doesn't work for you, don't do it again. But it can be a good growth point. Reach the point where you know what you want to do. It sounds like another secret to your productivity is to have projects in your pipeline and no lost time in between. Absolutely. And this applies to both the micro and the macro level. So on the macro level, I know the next 3 or 4 series that I'm going to write, probably 4 series that I'm going to write. Each of those will be at least 6 books long. So this is a fairly significant body of work ahead of me here still. And I know what they're going to be, and I know roughly what they're going to be about, although I'm going to make a lot of it up as I go along. But on the micro level, that also makes sense, because let's say that I wrapped up a chapter during my lunch break yesterday, and it's time for my next lunch break chapter today, or my next lunch break section today. And In the interim time, I've been thinking about what's going to happen next. In the intervening time between writing sessions, I've been thinking about what's going to happen. And that way, I've already got this information in the pipeline, essentially, ready to go, so that when I sit down, I can immediately get to work. So yeah, at the macro and micro level, that's really important for me. Anybody else have questions? Sometimes you have to keep working. And I think sometimes you have to keep working and not think about how much you're doing. If you stop to think about it, it can be overwhelming. I want to do the world record thing, but that's overwhelming for me. I am terrified of the idea. In fact, the only person I've ever mentioned it to before talking about it here today was my wife. Yes, I want to set a world record for I said it earlier in this thing here. I want to set the world record for books written in a year. I don't know if I'm going to do that this year or the next year, but I've already put in an application to Guinness. Record is 27 right now, as far as Guinness is concerned, but I have managed to confirm somebody else has done 36. And I suspect that the actual record is probably closer to 40. I'm trying to find out from other people because Guinness is behind the times. I can do 27. That's not actually hard. That's Barbara Cartland. Boy, I think I've already beaten her once or twice. But I definitely could. But if 40, that's hard. That's scary. This sort of stuff can be really overwhelming. My first book, when I was first starting to try and write my very first novel, was massively overwhelming. It's too big. It's just too big. And basically the way I approach it is the Dark Cave song from Frozen 2. Every parent in the room probably just understood that one. The bit where you take that next step, do the next right thing. Just do the next right thing. Do the next chapter, do the next scene. I can do a scene. I can't look at the whole book. I can do a scene. Once you have more experience, and a book is no problem, and a book is something that you can wrap your head around. Don't try and wrap your head around, I've got to do 6,000 words every day this week. Wrap your head around, I'm doing a chapter right now on something that's exciting me, and then I'm going to go take a break, and I'm going to do some exercise for a little bit, and then I'm going to do another chapter about something else that excites me, because I've had time to think about it and make it exciting. Anybody else? GWR has very set parameters for what they count. I'm sure they do. Yeah, I'm sure they do. Okay.
Amy asked, how do you deal with burnout?
Oh, I missed that. Sorry. I really work very, very hard to avoid it. Burnout sucks. And honestly, I think the burnout is probably about half of what people call writer's block. The other half usually being there's a variety. Somebody just wrote a really good piece about all of the different versions of it. Martin, was that you?
That was me.
Yeah, that was good. That was really good. Anybody who missed that, look that up. But yeah, I find that if I write too many words in a day, I'll burn out for an extended period of time. There's been several days over my writing career where I've written 20,000 or more words. The most I've ever done is 29,000 in a day. And every single time I go for one of those high things, it's always about a deadline. It's frequently about NaNoWriMo. And, the early days, it was NaNoWriMo. And I think that it's just not worth it for me, because every time I've done it, I've ended up exhausted and wrung out and not wanting to write for days afterwards. So I'm not actually gaining any time by doing that. So I really try very hard not to do that. In terms of burnout, I do two primary things. I refill the well as much as humanly possible. I read every single day. I read probably about 50 books a year. I watch lots of good television, and by good I mean the same sort of stuff that I read. So Arrowverse stuff, Star Trek Discovery. I love The Expanse. you know, um, you know, I write that sort of stuff, and so watching it helps me learn how to write better, and also helps inspire me and keep me motivated to do cool stuff. I hope that helps. Like refilling the well is a big thing, and not pushing yourself beyond whatever your current limit is an important thing. Because like I could run a marathon tomorrow, no problem. I'm sure I could. I'm still in decent shape. I would break myself doing it though. Now, if I spent the next 6 months training up to be able to run a marathon, I could probably do it without breaking myself. And that's really what it's about. It's about training yourself up to get to the point where you can safely and healthily do the thing that you want to do, whatever that is.
All right. We are at the 50-minute mark. Kevin, thank you. That was amazing. I want to talk to you a lot more about it when we get a chance, because productivity is obviously so important.
No problem.